I just want to give a quick introduction to you guys. Graham came to Sedona in 2015, this exact weekend, 10 years ago. So the first time that Graham and I did something together was exactly 10 years ago this weekend. And I'm so grateful to Graham. Few voices have reshaped the global conversation on our past more profoundly than our next guest. He's a best-selling author, journalist, and explorer whose groundbreaking work from Fingerprints of the Gods to Ancient Apocalypse has ignited worldwide debate about lost civilizations and humanity's forgotten chapters. And because of Graham and coming here these 10 years ago, it ignited this passion for me to do these events because I could see that Graham was bringing important information to our ancient past. And somehow there are forces that don't want that to come out. And Graham has been at the forefront, taking the hits from these forces. So in a way, as Graham says, he stands on the shoulders of other greats. We standing on the shoulders of Graham and Randall and the likes of them. Our next speaker with Graham is Master of Sacred Geometry, Geology, and Catastrophism. A researcher whose insights into Earth's ancient past are redefining our understanding of cyclical cataclysms and the rise and fall of civilizations. An educator, an architect, a founder of the Cosmographic Project. Please welcome both Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. The two of us now.
It's come down to just the two of us. Oh.
And hello to the audience there.
Yes.
I'm so sorry that I can't be there in person at the moment, but I'm certainly there in spirit.
Before we go forward, let's clear up one thing. It's catastrophism.
Yeah.
Trying to help Robert out here.
Absolutely.
Catastrophism.
Yeah, a word that should be better known because we've been
Yes.
laboring under the uniformitarian spell for far too long, which has excluded from analysis of the history and prehistory of humanity the role of catastrophes, and they need urgently to be re-included. And I suppose this brings us to our first topic, which is you've just come back, if I understand correctly, from a trip to the Azores. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Azores stand right there on the mid-Atlantic ridge, yeah?
Exactly, Graham.
There's got to be a catastrophic story underlying this. So please tell me all about your trip and all about the Azores. Tell us all about it and why you were there and why you feel the Azores matter.
I guess I could say that they matter because after a detailed reading of multiple translations of Plato's two dialogues, the relevant dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, and having some knowledge of the geology, particularly marine geology, and the geography that Plato very explicitly describes, it looks to me like of all the possible candidates that have been proposed for the locus of the Atlantean civilization, the one that seems to fit the details, Plato's very precise details, in specific descriptions the most, in my mind, is the area of the Azores, which are 9 islands almost in the mid-Atlantic, sitting astride the mid-Atlantic ridge at a what's called a triple plate junction, where you have actually 3 of the tectonic plates meeting. On the west, you have the North American plate. On the northeast, you have the Eurasian plate. And on the southeast, you have the African, now called the Nubian plate. Mm-hmm. And it's a very volatile region, but it also has a lot of the earmarks of having undergone catastrophic subsidence in the very recent geological past.
Right.
And for that reason, after combing through Plato's writings repeatedly and putting together the pieces, trying to connect the dots, it seems to me that is the prime location for what Plato is describing. And
just to jump in for a second, at a very sort of straightforward, simplistic level, tell us where Plato placed Atlantis in his mind's eye in the Timaeus and Critias? Where does he put Atlantis?
Oh, this power came forth from the Atlantic Ocean. He describes it being outside, west of the Pillars of Hercules. Not south, not north, not east, but west.
Yeah.
And, there was one of the things I've pointed out is that in the 60s and the 70s, it was declared by the geological establishment that any possibility of Atlantis being in the mid-Atlantic region was completely impossible because of what we knew about plate tectonics and continental drift and so on. And yet, when you actually go back through the research that was as early as the 1940s, you find out that there is an abundance of evidence that is consistent with Plato's description and consistent with the idea that there was a massive subsidence in that exact region. And now I was interested in there because I've fantasized about the Azores being part of what is called the Azores or Azores microcontinent, which shows up very clearly on bathymetric charts, on digital elevation models of the Atlantic Ocean. We can pull up some visuals here in a bit if you'd like to look at that. And its approximate size fits very closely to Plato's description. The topography fits very close to Plato's description. And the location fits. Some of the quotations, and I know you've read Plato, probably not recently, but his description of geography is very consistent. Beyond the west of the Pillars of Heracles or Hercules, you encounter islands, and then beyond those is the island complex of Atlantis, and then beyond that, as he describes it, is the true continent,
which we have to read as the Americas.
Exactly. I mean, and if you do that, if you read that as the Americas, then his whole geography becomes totally consistent.
Yeah.
And the 9 islands of the Azores have their roots in the microcontinent, as it's called, and there's essentially mountains, just very much like the Hawaiian Islands are mountains, whose peaks are above sea level. Likewise with the 9 islands of the Azores. And I only visited 4 of them. And essentially what I was looking for was anything in terms of consistency or inconsistency with Plato's account. And what I found nothing to be inconsistent with that possibility. We had a professional geologist traveling with us, and he admitted, yes, there is evidence here that would be more consistent with like continental bedrock than oceanic bedrock, which I found very interesting and supportive. But it was mostly just to take in the geology, take in the natural conditions of these islands, and just get a sense of my own direct experience. And what I found, I'll say, like, for example, São Miguel, first island we visited, was basically paradise, but then you look at the other islands, and there's definitely evidence that's consistent with catastrophic episodes in the recent geological past.
The kind of catastrophic episodes that you're hinting at here, if I'm correct, the well-known 400-foot, 120-meter sea level rise that followed the end of the Ice Age is not enough to expose the Azores as an above-water massive landmass.
No, it is not. It would certainly increase the size of the islands.
Yeah.
But it would not give you a landmass almost on the scale of, let's say, Iceland.
Right. So another factor is involved.
Another factor is involved, and that factor is what we call isostasy. It's the vertical movement of the Earth's crusts.
Yeah.
And there's been extensive research done on that, which in my mind bears directly on the issue of Atlantis. But it's like never the twain shall meet because of the, I guess I would say the political factors here that, you can't even say the word. If you say the A word, you're immediately consigned to the pseudoscientific fringe.
Yeah, it's an astonishing achievement of wicked propaganda that one of the most interesting topics that has been passed down to us by the ancients is being dismissed with such sneering disregard by what our friend John Anthony West used to call the quackademics.
Exactly. Now, I've got to admit that, there have been some pretty wild assertions that that sort of accreted onto Plato's very specific accounts. And one of the things I like to point out is that I kind of look at there's two dimensions to what Plato describes. One, the geology and the geography, which is primarily represented in Timaeus.
Yeah.
Then he discusses the the city, the ringed city, the infrastructure, which is primarily descriptive in Critias.
Yeah.
Now, you can accept the geological and geographic explanation without necessarily accepting this vast ringed infrastructure, right? Now, the argument is always between, the academics will say, well, he just meant it as an expression, a metaphor for his political ideals of his, his perfect civilization, his perfect society. And it was nothing more than a metaphor. Then you may have another school of thought goes a little further than that and says, well, there might have been some historic reality behind it that he drew from. The prime contender, as you well know, would be the destruction of, say, Crete because of the eruption of Terra, which happened about 900 years prior to Plato's time.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have the academic community willing to accept any kind of historical veracity at all to Plato's accounts, that seems to be the prime contender, although it doesn't fit the narrative at all. And including
they want it to be recent.
Yes.
They don't want it to be old, even though Plato was very clear that it was old, and Solon's source in the site in the delta was very clear. There's somehow this, it's very strange, psychological problem with quackademia, is this horror of the old, of the ancient, a desperate desire to do everything possible to keep things as young as possible until the very last moment when the evidence becomes overwhelming that they must absolutely concede that actually things have got a lot older. And, Göbekli Tepe, of course, was one of the big turning stones in that area. But this desperate effort to reduce Atlantis to a Minoan or a Mycenaean event that fits into an established timeline that the quackademics defend tooth and nail, smearing others who offer alternative points of view. It's just a real problem. It's a real problem in archaeology. It needs a more open-minded approach. But before I go further down that track, tell us a little bit more about isostasy, because that is really important. The way I view isostasy is a kind of seesaw with weight on one end of the seesaw pushing the other end up, and then when the weight comes off the other end, it has the opposite effect. Tell us how the Eagles fit into that picture.
Okay, so let's go back to 1948, the first traverse over the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And what we had there was a research vessel, interestingly called the Atlantis. But it was organized by Maurice Ewing, who was one of the founding fathers of marine geology and oceanography. And this is what he said, and I've got this in my presentations and in the book that I'm writing about this. I quote this: all hands were tense as the word spread through the little research vessel, Atlantis, for it meant we had reached our goal. A mile or so beneath our keels stretched the gloom-shrouded peaks, valleys, and ridges of the longest mountain system on Earth, the mysterious Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which we had come to explore. And then, of course, he issues the caveat: though our ship was named Atlantis, we had no illusions of solving that age-old mystery.
Interesting.
But then what he gets into is they traverse the ridge, and they took up some cores and dredge samples. And what they found was very surprising. For example, they pulled up a core that contained sand, as you would find at a beach. Yet this is over a mile below the surface of the ocean.
Right.
And he goes on, he describes here, the sand contains the remains of bottom-dwelling creatures living today in present oceans, but confined to much shallower and colder water. What they're getting into is they're finding this evidence over and over again of things that look like they're much deeper than they're supposed to be. Like here's some of the things we found in the second cruise, which was a year later, 1949, create new scientific puzzles. One was the discovery of prehistoric beach sand in 2 core samples of the bottom, brought up in one case from a depth of 2 and in the other nearly 3.5 miles.
Wow.
Far from any place where beaches exist today.
Mm-hmm.
So this is already, being found anomalous evidence in the 1940s.
Yeah.
And he goes on to say, and this is quoting Maurice Ewing here, sometime in the distant past, this sand found deep beneath the ocean must have been located on a beach at or near the surface of the sea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. And he says that the conclusion that the land must have sunk 2 to 3 miles, he calls that startling. It's startling.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have from 54, the ocean floor. This was a study by Hans Petersen, who was a Swedish geologist, marine geologist. And this was like a follow-up expedition. And he's talking here at a depth of 4,400 meters. The core sampler brought up a core nearly 9 meters long, the uppermost parts of which consisted of fairly homogeneous, fine-grained, deep-sea clay. But in the lower part, several layers of sand were found, which mineralogical examination showed to be not mafic, which is oceanic basalt, but of continental origin. That is derived from a coastal shelf of some continent or large island. Most surprising of all, in the lowest stratum of this sand were found vegetable remains. Twigs, nuts, and bark fragments of dicotyledonous bushes or trees, bespeaking still more emphatically a continental or island origin. Finally, in the uppermost parts of the same core, Flieger and his co-workers found a displaced fauna consisting of benthotic, which is bottom-dwelling, shallow water foram shells, which apparently had lived in depths of about 100 meters. Now, this is 2 miles below the ocean.
Sure.
So over and over, one is at a loss to explain how these products of a coastal shelf and submarine vegetation could have been carried to the position. The nearest part of the coast of South America is the Amazon estuary, which is situated far away. He goes on to say, in the event that a large island harboring vegetation and with a fairly extensive shelf crowned the mid-Atlantic ridge and became submerged during a catastrophe of seismic volcanic character. So right there, this is going back now to the 1950s or 40s, 50s. They're looking at this evidence that suggests something happened, that this is much lower than in the sea bottom than should. And then we have coming forward to, again, that same year, 1954, again, Maurice Ewing, and he's talking about the Atlantis cruiser and great meteor seamounts rise from a broad ridge or plateau, which extends from the mid-Atlantic ridge at 37 degrees north, 32 degrees west. The Atlantis seamount, briefly explored in 1947 and 1948, was found by echo sounding and submarine photography to have a fairly flat bedrock summit area at about 180 fathoms, covered in some cases by cobbles and in other by current rippled sand. Its slopes are covered with sand or ooze symmetrically rippled at 400 fathoms and marked by slump features at 570 fathoms. About a ton of flat pteropod limestone cobbles was dredged from the summit area. One of the cobbles gave an apparent radiocarbon age of 12,000 years.
Ah, that was going to be my next question. Had any of this material been carbon dated? So that's fascinating. So 12,000 years, that puts us back into the Younger Dryas time frame.
Yes. And let me finish the quote.
Yeah.
The state of lithification of the limestone suggests that it may have been lithified under subaerial conditions.
Right.
In the atmosphere, right?
Yeah.
And that the seamount may have been an island within the past 12,000 years.
Wow. Wow. And this is in a mainstream source.
This is mainstream source, yes.
Going back to the 1950s when there were mainstream scientists who still had open minds.
Yeah, 1954. The cruiser and great meteor seamounts studied in 1952 have larger, flatter summits at 150 and 165 fathoms depths. These youthful geos may have originated as volcanoes, which were later capped by limestone, and more recently have sunk beneath the sea. So this is the empirical data that's beginning to accumulate. And there's a lot more than this. But getting back to your question about isostasy,
which is how this stuff sinks beneath the sea, really. If sea level rise isn't enough, is isostasy the mechanism that drives it beneath the sea? And if so, can you visualize that for us? Can you envisage what that might have meant if you were on the mid-Atlantic ridge at a time of an isostatic collapse? What would it have felt like?
Well, it would have felt like one god-awful earthquake, I think. And then you would have had enormous tsunamis washing in over what had previously been subaerial or above the sea level. There is evidence of a major collapse. I don't know how much time we've got because I actually gave.
Well, what we've not done is explained isostasy properly, and I think it would be good if you could address that, Randall.
Right. So here I was just showing some of the empirical data. Consistent with subsidence. Now, this is from 1969, Tectonic Implications of Glacio-Eustatic Sea Level Fluctuations. It appeared in Earth and Planetary Science Letters by a team. Now, eustatic is the rise and fall of sea level commensurate with the expansion and contraction of glaciers on land.
Yeah.
Right? Glaciers melt, you have eustatic rise. So that's important. Eustatic rise and fall of sea level is directly related to isostatic differentiation of the bottom of the ocean bottom. So this is what was published in 1969, Tectonic Implications of Glacio-Eustatic Sea Level Fluctuations. The possible tectonic implications of glacio-eustatic sea level fluctuations have only received minor attention in connection with such problems as ocean floor spreading. The purpose of this report is to point out that late Pleistocene sea level data suggest that the ocean basins have responded isostatically and by a significant amount to the loading and unloading of water associated with Pleistocene glaciation.
Right.
So this was the beginning of these studies that yes, if you've got this major rise of sea level, you have to have a compensatory downward movement of the sea bottom.
But also there's the other side of the equation, which is the ice mass being lifted off North America. Which then you have isostatic rebound at the opposite end of that seesaw would be pretty much the mid-Atlantic ridge.
Yes. Can I do a share screen here? I believe we can do that. If I have, we'll see here. These are some images aerial images taken years ago of the area around Hudson Bay, which Hudson Bay was the center of the great North American ice mass. Let's see, is this the one? Let me get there we go. Okay, so these are elevated and abandoned shorelines along Hudson Bay. The highest one is about 1,500 feet above present sea level.
Wow.
And I can go to the next. There's a couple of variations of it. And so this is a rebound now of continental granitic bedrock. This is the core of the North American continent, and it was where the thickest part of the Laurentide ice sheet was, at about 1.5 miles thick. And in this photograph, here's Hudson Bay out here, and what you'll see is that as you go back in time, as we come forward, you're going back in time. The largest displacements occurred immediately after the deglaciation. So in other words, the early stages of rebound were much faster than later on.
To put this in simplistic terms, when we talk about rebound, What we're saying is that landmass was pressed down by
Yes.
the massive weight of the ice. And then as the ice came off, as it turned into water and went back into the world ocean, the land began to rebound upwards.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly right. And the point is in what's in geophysics, the geoid of the Earth is always trying to move towards equilibrium.
Yeah.
So if one place is rising, somewhere else needs to be going down. And that depression is going to not necessarily be uniform. Mm-hmm. It's going to be focused along the zones of least resistance.
Yeah.
This is now 1974. This is from the professional journal Quaternary Research. The title of the article is Late Quaternary, Glacio, and Hydroisostasy on a Layered Earth. So hydro meaning isostasy driven by movements in ocean volume. Hydroisostasy, the concept that meltwater from Pleistocene ice caps produced loadings of ocean floors such that significant global deformation followed.
Mm-hmm.
Recently has been examined by Walcott. The earlier qualitative assessments of hydroisostasy as an important factor in glacioeustasy are qualitatively supported by Walcott, who also demonstrated that the effects of glacioeustatic inundation will vary with location.
Mm-hmm.
And again, beyond the time we've got to discuss this day, but obviously one of those variants are going to be focused along areas of least resistance, and clearly one of those would be along a triple plate junction, such as we find associated with the
again,
I'm
in the role of simplifying this, we're to envisage a North America where the landmass is pushed down by the weight of ice, and a mid-Atlantic ridge which is pushed up
yes.
the opposite end of the seesaw. And then when the reverse happens, the mid-Atlantic ridge subsides catastrophically beneath the sea. And this, coupled with sea level rise, results in the loss of a kind of Atlantis-sized landmass.
That's exactly it.
Yeah,
you nailed it. I mean, that's it. And that's a good analogy, a seesaw type effect.
Yeah.
And so were we to enter another ice age and 400 feet of sea level, which is hundreds of billions of trillions of tons of water, removed, you're going to have the analogy again I used was like, just think of a beach ball, and you press it this way, it expands this way, right?
Yeah.
And when I don't know if it was you and I together on Joe Rogan, but we were talking about Atlantis, and I was trying to explain isostasy to him. And he was sitting on a nice, soft, comfortable chair. And I said, right now, Joe, the chair you're sitting on is undergoing isostatic depression because of the weight of your ass. and he got it. I think he got it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, one of the intriguing aspects of Plato, which of course causes a great deal of controversy, is the statement he passes down to us that the submergence of Atlantis happened 9,000 years before Solon's visit to the temple of Neith at Sais in the Delta. That's drawing from the quoted words of the Egyptian priest, which coincides 9,000 years before Solon is 9,600 BC, which coincides perfectly with meltwater pulse 1b, which Plato could not possibly have known about, and nevertheless he gives us a date which coincides with what is recognized as a catastrophic era. But at the same time, we have all these desperate attempts by those who want everything to be young to say, oh, Plato didn't mean years, he meant months. And I'm saddened to see that people who style themselves as alternative thinkers are also grasping onto this hopeless straw that Plato was somehow referring to lunar months when the reference was to 9,000 instead of to solar years. And if anybody knew their solar years, it was the ancient Egyptians. Again, it's an effort to castrate Atlantis, to turn it into something safe that nobody has to worry about, which doesn't rewrite the entire historical timeline. Tell me your views on this.
well, let's just do a quick share screen again, and there we go. Okay, so here's the Greek of, and this is just one sample. We could have done multiple samples.
Sure.
Here's the Greek, though, from Timaeus, and I've underlined this word up here, eton.
Yep.
Eton. Well, eton is the Greek word for years.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a completely different word for month, which is mu, eta, nu, which is almost word moon. It's from where we get our word month. So
Right.
first of all, there's two very distinct words, one for years, one for months.
Mm-hmm.
Plato uses the word eton, which is years. He doesn't use the word month. He uses the word that we understand is annual cycles around the sun, years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then also, if we go back here, we look at 9,000 lunar years or months. That's 750 solar years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So according to Herodotus, Solon was in Egypt during the 26th dynasty, which lasted from 664 BC to 525 BC. Solon's then in Egypt circa about 600 BC in round numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Again, according to Herodotus, during the reign of Amasis. Okay. Now, 600 BC plus 750 years brings us back to 1,350 BC.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we can see here that's the end of the reign of Amenhotep and the beginning of the reign of Akhenaten. This was the 18th dynasty. Now, if we accept the lunar explanation, we're supposed to believe then that their sacred registers only really essentially go back to the reign of Akhenaten.
Exactly.
Which is 18th dynasty of the New Kingdom.
Yeah.
Well, then we've completely lost everything prior to that.
Yeah, the Turin Papyrus and the incredible renal lengths in the king lists of ancient Egypt, for example, at the Temple of Seti I in Abydos, going back and back and back in time, and to reduce all that to a period of 750 years is just actually plain stupid.
Well, yes, and there's a lot more problems with it, but you can see immediately the whole chronology falls apart. Even the academically accepted chronology makes no sense. Any alternative chronology, no chronology here makes sense.
Yeah.
And to me, the fact that the terminology that was used by Plato is clearly referencing years and not months.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just another one of those ways of distracting from the core issue. Another one being the tendency of those who criticize the whole notion of Atlantis to separate Plato's story of Atlantis, to separate that from the global flood tradition, the fact that we have more than 200, 300 flood myths all around the world, which speak of a global cataclysm, which speak of a time before the flood, often described as a golden age, which speak of humanity somehow angering the gods and the universe striking us down. This is not a story that's limited to Plato. This is a story that's found all around the world. And one of the ways that those who specialize in so-called debunking try to attack Atlantis is to completely ignore the global flood tradition, of which Atlantis is just one small part. It's not even the largest. It's not even the largest part of it.
Exactly. And when you put the geophysics, bring the geophysics into it, like we've just been talking about here, clearly it is the rapid melting of the ice sheets, not only North American, but also the North European. The whole Fennoscandian ice sheets were huge in their own right, much bigger than what now mantles Greenland. The timing suggests that the catastrophic melting of both sheets happened in a series of huge pulses of meltwater.
Yeah.
The final pulse of that meltwater pulse 1b, just purely coincidentally, is dated 11,600 years ago.
Yeah.
Like Plato told us that 2,300 years ago.
Exactly.
Right? Exactly. And the final subsidence of Atlantis followed that rapid pulse of sea level rise.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just ignore that. So like you said, the flood myths, I think we can attribute, primarily to three factors. One, the direct glacial melting, such as you and I were exploring in our traverse from Portland to Minneapolis.
Absolutely.
Major tsunami events
Yeah.
that could inundate coastal areas, and then the rain out from these catastrophic events. Obviously, a bolide impact either into an ocean or into an ice sheet is going to inject enormous amounts of water vapor into the atmosphere that is then going to have to rain out over a period of weeks.
Yeah.
And what we find when we look at the flood myths, some of them provide some details that are not provided by other accounts. So you have to almost take it holistically and realize that, different cultures had different perspectives on these events.
And also different experiences. I mean,
Yes.
it's fascinating in the Iranian, the ancient Persian accounts, that what is described is less a flood and more of an incredible deep freeze, an absolute a freeze from which people must seek shelter by digging underground shelter. It's described. Again, these are the consequences of the kind of global cataclysm that we're envisaging, that brought the Younger Dryas to. And in fact, there really were, in my view, two cataclysms: the beginning of the Younger Dryas and the end of the Younger Dryas.
Yes.
Cataclysmic.
Yes.
I
even speculate there was a preliminary catastrophe associated with Meltwater 1's Pulse 1A that could have happened about 14.6.
Yes.
I'm still exploring that.
Yeah.
I don't have a definitive opinion on it one way or another, but it
I'll
almost
tell you my view, if I may,
Yeah.
that if there has been a lost civilization, and I emphasize if, I've never claimed to have proved that there was a lost civilization, nor have any of us. I'm just claiming that it's an interesting matter to investigate, given the huge amount of anomalies that we have, that we have all around the world. I've kind of lost my track here. What was I saying? If there was a lost civilization?
Well, I mentioned that there was possibly a third inundation dated a little earlier at 14,600.
Yeah, that was my point. If there was a lost civilization, that earlier event would have been what alerted them, would have been what woke them up to the danger that was coming, that would have made them pay attention to all of this, and to be in some state of preparedness when the real cataclysms of the Younger Dryas took place.
Yes. That's pretty much the same framework that I'm looking at it. That would have been like a precursor catastrophe.
Yeah.
And that was then followed by the Younger Dryas, the lower boundary, which we're placing between 12.8 and 12,900.
Again, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's particularly interesting after that Meltwater Pulse 1A, that 14,500, 14,000, whatever, 800 years ago. It's after that you begin to see the first stirrings, the first traces of what becomes the Taztepler civilization in Turkey. The very earliest, they suddenly sort of start popping up after that. There's definitely something went on before the Younger Dryas, no doubt about that.
Yes, I think that there were, you want to call it almost forewarnings or precursor events. Typically, like oftentimes when you have a major volcanic eruption, they will be preceded by smaller eruptions. That's what happened with Krakatoa. Krakatoa didn't all of a sudden blow its stack. It spent several months warning, lesser eruptions were occurring, seismic events were occurring, and then finally that was building up to the climactic event, which was this big, what was it, 1883, I believe.
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that, yeah. But Plato actually describes he says, there have been and will be again many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire and water.
Yeah.
And then, of course, as you well know, he goes on to describe and invoke the story of Phaeton.
Yes.
Right? Phaeton, there's a story, he says, which even you, he's talking to Solon there, which even you have preserved, that once upon a time Phaeton, the son of Helios, having yoked the steeds in his father's chariot, was not able to drive them in the path of his father, and he burned up all that was upon the earth and was himself destroyed by a thunderbolt. Now here's, to me, the most interesting line. Now this has the form of a myth. but it really signifies a decline of the
Mhm.
bodies moving around the earth and in the heavens, and a great conflagration of all things upon the earth,
Yeah,
recurring at long intervals of time. So it's like he's opening the story of Atlantis by invoking the myth of Phaeton.
yeah.
And then
A
he says, well,
cosmic cataclysm. Yes.
yeah. And then he's saying, well, it has the form of a myth, but here's what it really signifies. I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty clear cut, I think, what Plato's doing there.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that he felt at liberty to incorporate elements of myth and tradition within his own philosophy, where
Yeah.
it was useful to do that. And in that way, his philosophy serves as a time capsule that has carried down precious memories from the deep past.
Yes.
That if we are willing to open our minds and consider them, can completely reframe our picture of the origins of civilization.
Well, I think the position we're at now is that, in contrast to the mainstream narrative that's being pushed on us, science itself is confirming the veracity of the ancient traditions.
Yeah.
I look, okay, here's the myths, the legends, the folklore, the ancient traditions. Here's modern science, and this is what I think is happening.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It is slowly happening. There is an old guard, particularly in archaeology, that vehemently defend what in many ways is a completely discredited paradigm, and will continue to do so, clinging on by the skin of their teeth for as long as possible, and doing as much harm and damage as they can to anybody who suggests alternative points of view. But the writing is on the wall. And the new evidence keeps on coming in, I don't know what that evidence proves, except one thing: it proves that the structure of history and prehistory that we've been given, the further back you go, the less reliable that structure is. That we've been given a story about our deep past, which does not explain a vast number of anomalies that need explanation. And that's why people are so uncomfortable with the mainstream archaeological narrative. It's not because archaeologists are bad people. They're doing important work, great work. They're the tools that they use, and the mindset, the professionalism that they bring to the investigation of the past are incredibly important. Their mistake is thinking that they have a monopoly on this, that those are the only tools and the only mindset that works. And I think what we're saying is that we need to break that monopoly, that other voices need to be allowed in. Our collective past as a species cannot be owned. The keys to it cannot be owned by a small group of academics.
That's exactly right. And for the thing about archaeology, which is also sort of the thing with geology, is that you may have an archaeologist who essentially spends 5 or 10 years on one dig.
Yeah.
And as far as that goes, there's not going to be anybody else who knows nearly as much as they do about that one specific site.
Correct. Yeah.
But that does not necessarily then endow them with the ability to see the big picture.
Yeah.
And then, like you just said, you use the word monopoly. And I think that's what they think. Well, yes, we know some names. We won't mention the names, but that we've seen exactly that mindset. Well, I happen to be the foremost expert on this particular archaeological site at this particular time, and therefore extrapolating from that, I can project onto the whole big picture.
Yeah.
And same thing happens in geology. I mean, you may read a geological paper where a geologist has spent years looking at one outcrop and studying one outcrop.
Mm-hmm.
Well, absolutely, they're going to know as much about that outcrop or more than anybody else.
Yeah.
But that does not endow them necessarily with the ability to conceptualize the big pipicture.
Absolutely not.
And so much of like just what you and I did together when we made that traverse.
Yeah.
We explored the scab lands, and then we moved into Montana. We looked at some of the area around the glacial lake that was presumed to be the source of the floods.
Yeah.
And then we came across all the way to Minneapolis. Now, do you remember the last site that you and I went to together was up on the St. Croix River, and we saw those giant potholes. I have this great photograph of you I'm down in the pothole,
Yeah.
and you're leaning over looking into it.
Yes.
Now, that was not created by any modern forces.
No.
That was a singular event when you had a gigantic flood of meltwater coming
Yeah.
down through the St. Croix River Valley.
Yeah.
And that dates to pretty much the dating that I've been able to see on that, puts it right in the same window as the cutting of Grand Coulee and all the rest that we were seeing in the Scablands.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can come forward to the Finger Lakes of Western New York and we'll find the same dates.
Mm.
What's missing, in my opinion, is connecting the dots.
Yeah. The big picture.
The big picture.
Yeah.
And that's where we need to be going. We need to have researchers now that are coming out, looking at the big picture and starting to connect these dots, because you've got geologists and archaeologists looking at all of these sites, but not connecting the dots yet.
Exactly so.
We need
Exactly
to start.
so.
Yeah.
And that's why conferences like this are important, and it's why we need to remember and we need to remind the quackademics that members of the general public also have important insights to bring to this party.
Mm-hmm.
That it is not simply the quote unquote qualified archaeologist who has a right to speak about the past or to have insights. That we should be open to the insights of all and everyone, because the past is a deep mystery. I mean, as a species, we keep somehow pretending to ourselves that it isn't, but it is really a deep mystery. Who are we? Where do we come from? Is there a purpose to life? Is there a meaning to life? The ancients devoted their best minds to considering such matters, whereas today we pay way too much attention to trivia and to passing fads and fancies. You know, we need to learn. We need to learn from the past. This is the message, and to do so with a sense of respect and a sense of humility. And it's that disrespect for Plato that I come across in academics whenever he says something that doesn't fit with their narrow and limited picture of the past. They immediately disrespect him. These same quackademics, present themselves as being champions of indigenous peoples in places like the Amazon rainforest. Believe in spirits. They have encounters with entities in altered states of consciousness. And if you put that to an academic, they'll say, "Oh, that's just rubbish. That has no meaning at all." So beneath their politically correct veneer, the experts in these fields actually despise indigenous traditions and the word of the past that has come down to us.
Well, yeah, in the aftermath of the first ancient apocalypse. That was the title of it, right?
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Okay. It's the criticisms of it were that it's like you are disrespecting the indigenous people of the past, right?
Yeah.
And their traditions. When my reading of it is, no, it's exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
Because you guys are the ones who are discrediting the core of their traditions.
Yes. That's the whole problem. They don't, and the quackademics don't seem to see this. That they need to listen to the voices of the past, and the voices of the past say there was a worldwide cataclysm, and before it there was some kind of golden age. There was something before it that was destroyed and ended. We cannot simply ignore that testimony because it doesn't fit with the time frame that a relatively limited group of scholars have imposed.
There is, some of the critics have said, well, the Egyptians, it's implausible that they could have preserved a tradition for 9,000 years.
Huh.
That's been put forward. Yet recently, within the last year or two, I've been doing some researching on indigenous peoples of the Great Basin area, which includes mostly Nevada, but a lot of Utah. There's the, what are it called? You've ever heard of the Burning Man Festival?
I've even been there.
Oh, okay. So that's
amazing experience.
I've not been there, but the Black Rock Desert where that is held was one of the basins of Glacial Lake Lahontan, which was the second largest lake in that Great Basin region. At the site of the Burning Man Festival, the water was 500 feet deep.
Wow.
And people that are attending that are not thinking about, well, not so long ago there was 500 feet of water here.
Yeah.
The total depth of Lake Lahontan at its deepest bay was about 900 feet.
Wow.
Well, so the tribes, the Paiute tribe was the primary American Indian tribe that lived in that region. And they had stories and legends that go back, well, they said go back to, they remember their ancestors there were living on the shores of a great lake, and there were ice up on the mountains to the west.
Yeah.
Right? Well, it was never taken seriously, but because of the fact that the lake was gone by 10,000 years ago, right? And the glaciers on the mountains essentially were gone at the same time. But the first thing they did was, this was in the 90s, they were persuaded, because there had been in the early 20th century a cave that had been discovered by, I believe he was an archaeologist, and he was exhuming in the cave. He was digging, and he found 60 mummies in that cave.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay, so now this cave, interestingly, was very close to the high water mark of Lake Lahontan. So the assumption was that the vigorous currents of the lake is what eroded this cave into this limestone, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What became of those mummies, no one really knows. But it was reported in the local press that this guy found this. Then in the 1940s or 30s, in the 1930s, there was a rancher who was digging a well down on the floor of the basin, and he uncovered a skeleton of an individual that was 8 feet tall. Now, this was also reported. I was actually able to go in and find copies online of the newspaper, the local newspaper from that year. Found the actual account where it describes him finding that. Well, so now fast forward to the 1990s, and there, because of the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act, there was several additional mummy found in another cave much more recently. And the tribe wanted to repatriate that. They wanted to rebury it. So there was a controversy very similar to the Kennewick Man controversy.
Yeah.
And the result of it is that the tribe finally agreed to do radiocarbon dating. But they said only the Danish geneticists that did the dating on the Kennewick Man, because we don't trust American scientists, they said. So they brought him in, he did radiocarbon dating, and it came out to 10,000 years old, or even older.
Yeah.
Even older, okay? This is in the 90s. Fast forward about another 10 years, and the tribes are claiming ancestral connections with this mummified figure. So they do DNA testing, the tribes and the figure, and guess what happens? They find out that they are genetically related.
How interesting, yes.
So now, the point being, though, they have traditions of their ancestors living on a lake that disappeared 10,000 years ago.
So the oral tradition has preserved accurate historical information, which has, of course, was never written down, but which has been passed down from family to family over multiple generations and still remains intact today. And indeed, this is the case worldwide. Very similar examples from Australia have recently come out, where we know that oral traditions can be fantastically accurate, and in some ways more accurate than written traditions, because nothing endures as well as a great story. Passed down story embed important factual information in it. And even if later storytellers don't know the meaning of that factual information, as long as they pass the story on true, that factual information will pass on with it.
Right. And we also have to believe that, and understand, not to believe, but understand that the oral tradition was very different from just somebody casually telling a story.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it was a very structured thing.
Totally.
And one of the places where that tradition is still preserved is the much maligned, wrongly maligned Masonic fraternity.
Mhm.
because what you have there is a tradition that goes back now at least a 1,000 years,
Mhm.
and the way that this is perpetuated is mouth to ear,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the narratives are recited over and over and
Mhm.
over again until the recipient masters it
Yeah.
to the word, and then it's handed on to the next and to the next, so
Mhm.
that hundreds of years go by and virtually it's exactly the same words.
Yeah.
Well, this is really representative of how these oral traditions worked. And Plato even describes that, how Solon, or rather Critias, describes how he listened over and over and over again until he could literally memorize the story that his grandfather was telling him.
Yeah. 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 That's the way it was, and I'm reminded of that tradition of an Egyptian king criticizing Thoth for inventing writing, saying that he had not invented a mechanism for remembering, he had invented a mechanism for forgetfulness,
Yeah.
and that the writings would roam around the world unsupported by any wise advice, and that anybody could have access to them and nobody would know what to do with them. I thought there was a lot of wisdom in that. It seemed counterintuitive at first, but it makes sense.
It makes sense. Yeah. And I mean, I know my own experience when I went into the craft, learning the ritual in its entirety. I spent almost 7 years until I had mastered it to the point where I could stand and recite literally 2.5 hours
Wow.
from memory. Now I've forgotten a lot of it because I haven't been active in over a decade,
Yeah.
but it's all still here.
Sure.
If I heard it again a few times, it would all come back.
I think actually that some of the mysteries in our past that remain to be exposed do concern secret societies, and do concern a behind the scenes organization that is somehow involved in making civilizations. I won't go too far into that, but there are so many traditions, for example, from ancient Sumer, which speak of this, which speak of the role of these particular advisors who seem to be part of a esoteric or secretive group, which is there to guide and advise societies over very, very long periods of time. And the academic disbelief that such ideas could be retained for thousands of years is, in my view, nonsense. Passed on within a highly structured oral tradition, the ideas can survive potentially forever.
Potentially, yes. And it brings to something, a question that I've intrigued me for a long time, which is that given catastrophes, one of the details of myths over and over again is that there was some group, some individuals that had foreknowledge.
Yeah.
Now, where did that foreknowledge come? I mean, we can kick it upstairs and say it was some kind of divine revelation, but that doesn't really explain anything.
Lost ancient science.
Right. Somebody had foreknowledge. They were able to prepare. Again, referring to like the Masonic craft, there's a legend of Enoch knowing that the flood was going to come, and so he took steps to preserve the ancient science and stories by.
And of course, it's the same story with Atrahasis in Mesopotamia.
Yes.
Warned by the god Ea or Enki of the coming of the flood, takes steps, makes preparations, and even buries tablets with knowledge upon them in the city of Sippar.
Yes, and
to be recovered later by mankind after the disaster.
Well, and then like Plato says right there in Timaeus, he says, well, those who survive are going to typically be, who essentially survive by the luck of the draw, are going to be wholly preoccupied with continuing to survive in the aftermath, in the desolation of, in the aftermath of a flood or a catastrophe, whereas those who took steps to prepare are going to be the ones who are preserving the knowledge to pass it on. And that to me does not sound so exotic or esoteric or ridiculous. That, I mean, even today we have prepper movements, people who are
sure. It sounds perfectly reasonable. When it comes down to something that threatens the existence of the entire human race, we are an innovative and inventive species, and we would find a way around it. We'd find a way to keep the seed of knowledge going, to keep it coming through the catastrophe to the times that followed. And that's what I think we're living in. We're living in the times that followed, and that's what the ancient Sumerians also believed, that we're living in the post-Diluvian era. And this is ultimately the same story that Plato is telling us in the Atlantis tradition as well.
Exactly.
Anybody in the room who wants to ask a question?
Randall, Odyssey Marine Explorations of Tampa, Florida, dug up a shipwreck a decade ago worth $200 million. It was down 15,000 feet. They have the technology and the capability and the submarines to do research in 400, 500 fathoms of water pretty easily. Would you like to approach them and see if they'd be willing to join a search to explore what might be the seabed where Atlantis was?
Well, if you've got connections, sure. I definitely.
Oh yeah, I'd definitely connect.
Conversation, and would not need to go down that deep. Between 1 and 2 miles to the surface of the Azores Plateau. Well, that would be a very interesting conversation to have, and I'd love to have that conversation.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. My biggest question is, what caused the 1 mile of ice over the northern hemisphere, and was that a catastrophic event that caused the 1 mile ice age? And how long do you think that existed prior to the Younger Dryas?
Complicated story. It really, you could almost say we're still in an ice age, but just in a glacial. We've had that ice mass over North America for more than 300,000 years. In fact, significantly, there have been lulls and peaks. There have been rises and falls. There's been times like the Eemian about 140,000 years ago when things got really warmer than they are today. So it's not been a continuous story. But I think the general argument, and I'll defer to Randall here, is that to do with the Milankovitch cycle, to do with the Earth's relationship to the sun, the nature of our orbit, liquidity, and even the precession of the equinoxes. All of this has an effect on Earth's climate. That's a mainstream point. I'd like to hear Randall's position on this.
Well, what I would say is that the onset of an ice age is so far pretty much still not explained. You've got this discontinuity there between the fact that you have to evaporate a whole lot of ocean water. It has to be precipitated out over land, and then it has to be able to freeze. If you think of an ice age, when we look, Graham just mentioned the Eemian, that was warmer than now. In fact, glaciers had shrunk back to the point that sea levels were about 20 feet higher than now. Okay, so when the Eemian came to an end, it was a drastic situation where, imagine you're in Canada now, it gets cold in the winter, it snows, you might get many feet of snow, spring comes and that snow melts, goes back into the groundwater, the surface water, ultimately ends up going back into the oceans, right? And this cycle continues every year, right? Now, onset of an ice age, you get your winter, the snow falls, and then essentially, you can think of it this way, spring doesn't come for another 10,000 years. Something interrupts the normal cycle. Graham mentioned the Milankovitch forces, which are played out over a long, slow, protracted period, but there's something else juxtaposed on top of those Milankovitch cycles. And it requires a lot of heat to evaporate the water from the oceans, but then it has to be simultaneously cold over the continents. So it's a tricky situation, and I think we have to ultimately be looking at the effects of multiple bolide impacts.
Yeah.
Because if a bolide impact into an ocean, that's going to cause the injection of water vapor, and then if that was followed by a cosmic winter along the lines of Younger Dryas, then perhaps you've got the mechanism for preventing the annual melting of that accumulation of ice. at the end of the Pleistocene, you had the final phase of the Great Ice Sheet was called the Wisconsin in North America. And there was the onset of the late Wisconsin, which occurred about 26,000 years ago after a period of fairly relative warmth. And within 26 to 28,000 years ago, the climate rapidly got much colder. So the question you asked is an open question. It still has not been resolved yet. I do think, though, that it would be a futile attempt if you're trying to explain the phenomena strictly on the basis of terrestrial phenomena. I think we have to start looking at the bigger cosmic picture to begin to make sense out of it.
Well, then, Graham, I don't know if you saw Brett Weinstein's response to you in the last couple days. But he actually explained something that I'd never heard anyone talk about, that our solar system is traveling in our galaxy around other cosmic events, and that he actually thinks that it might be a outside of our atmosphere or outside of our solar system event that might have actually caused some of the Younger Dryas events.
I mean, a very interesting point of view raised by my friend Walter Crittenden on this matter is the possibility that our sun is part of a binary star, and that the binary is, which itself is already a binary, that we may, all of the effects of accretion may be explained by a very large orbit of our sun around another star. I think that it's, we're just beginning to see the surface of these cosmic mysteries. The Earth cannot exist without the cosmos. We're part of the cosmos, and the cosmos, of course, has enormous effects on Earth and on civilization.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, gentlemen, for attending today and being leaders, showing leaderships of humanity and leading us towards disclosure of truth and of the past, which we can all learn from the past. And that's why a lot of us are here for that today. I want to raise the issue of the real facts that are happening on Earth with regards to pole shifts and the idea of the poles having moved in last decade as much as the last 100 years. And the shifting of poles seems to me as a very significant event that doesn't get talked much about. And could this be, as a part of the learning curve, could that have been the reason why we had the catastrophic failures in the past from a pole shift kind of a concept? And right now, could we be heading for that sort of thing right now because of how fast the poles are moving?
It's an important question. The first thing to make clear is that magnetic pole shifts and geographic pole shifts are not necessarily the same thing. However, it's hard to imagine that the magnetic pole is completely disconnected from the rotation of the planet Earth. There must be a connection. I've gone into the issue of pole shifts in the past many years ago in fingerprints, and I've kind of stayed away from it since then. Have you been looking at that issue in recent years?
Who, me?
Yeah, but that pole shift.
The important distinction you made is between the geographic pole and the magnetic pole. I could argue that the motion of the magnetic pole is residual from the adjustments that occurred, the geophysical adjustments that occurred to this planet. To the extent that, I think like you, I immersed myself into the work of Charles Hapgood early on. And brilliant work. But towards the end, I think he sort of he fully remained a catastrophist, but he sort of abandoned his original version of accelerated crustal pole shift.
Correct.
I would speculate that to the extent that pole shifts, not necessarily the magnetic pole, but a geographic pole, may actually be a consequence of the changing shape of the geoid. If you think about the rebounding of the crust that we looked at, the picture, the isostatic rebounding under the ice sheet, well, it's likely that 1,500 feet was actually closer to 2,000 or half a mile in vertical movement away from the Earth's center of mass. Well, now we know that because of the rotation of the Earth, the equatorial diameter is 26 miles greater than the polar diameter. Well, what happens if you move a significant portion of a plate several thousand feet away from its point of equilibrium? I think that you could then have, as a consequence, a period of accelerated. Remember, we looked at those images and we saw that the earliest rebounds were the largest, right? And each step, it got smaller. It's still rebounding, right? Well, consider the possibility that the Earth's crust is then trying to readjust to the shape of the geoid, which would then cause, I believe, the possibility of accelerated plate tectonics.
Yeah, or accelerated polar wonder.
Yes, and its corollary, accelerated polar wander.
Yeah. Can you imagine the perfect that would be created with sea level rise, isostatic rebound, and Earth a shifting of the pole, an actual geographical shift of the pole? I mean, that's the ultimate apocalyptic scenario, and oddly, that is kind of what's remembered in many of the world traditions.
And we still don't really have an explanation for the core of the ice sheet being Hudson Bay, while large areas of the Arctic Ocean were ice-free.
Yeah.
And you had the Arctic coastline of Siberia densely inhabited by Pleistocene megafauna.
Yeah. The world was very different, and I've certainly reopened my mind to the whole issue of pole shift. I'm not excluding that at all. I think we have to remain open to these cataclysmic possibilities to explain the evidence.
We thank you all for being here, and I know everyone here much appreciates this kind of a chat. So thank you.
Great. I was going to say, if you could go ahead and do a little research, see if you can find out if anybody's working on a time machine. That could solve a lot of problems here, answer a lot of questions.
Go ahead with the next question.
Thank you for being here in spirit. You're missed. A lot of us have been following your works and also the research going on into the possibility of a 90-degree physical pole shift of the Earth. You mentioned megafauna. There are stories about woolly mammoths with fresh flowers, unchewed, still in their mouths. You mentioned Charles Hapgood. I know a lot of people think that his work was compromised, that at some point his manuscript may have been altered to protect certain interests. There was a book called World in Peril about a military exploration of the Arctic, which included some declassified information. Given the rise in thought that we are actually in another antediluvian time, that the Earth may be due for a cyclical 12,000 year 90-degree pole shift, and all of your theories about melting and creation of glaciers seem to fit neatly within that theory. Any thoughts about the idea that we're actually rapidly approaching another pole shift, which may be linked to a galactic current sheet, and you were mentioning the effect of the sun on our entire system?
There's a curious thing in the ancient world tradition, speak of a former Catamine, the destruction of civilization. And oddly, they all say that it was something to do with the behavior. That the universe became that the universe was disturbed, or in the Sumerian tradition, that God Enlil was disturbed by the noise humanity was making. There's lots of metaphors and ways that this is put. When I look at the ancient traditions and I look at our civilization today, I think we tick all the boxes for the next lost civilization. And it's time to take care of our fellow human beings if we want to have any kind of future as a species. I do think we live at an absolutely crucial time in the story of the Earth.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Randall, do you have something? Sorry.
Yeah, I will say that, after starting with Velikovsky in the early 70s and moving on to Hapgood and actually several others, I kind of started coming to think that it was very difficult to come up with a scenario that would cause the planet to shift 90 degrees on its axis, because then we have to start breaking things down. Hapgood's model was just a crust. Velikovsky's model, I believe, was the entire planetary mass. Well, either case, it requires a tremendous amount of mechanical energy to cause that as a consequence.
Yeah.
And I methodically and arduously worked through some math years ago on what would it take in terms of a bolide impact to literally trigger the planet to its rotational axis to shift by any amount at all. And it was a massive impact, imparting a lot of energy. And at that point, I kind of began to move away from the pole shift concept, with the caveat that what I just explained in very truncated form, the aftermath of a catastrophe that involves the mass redistribution over the surface of the Earth, causing an accelerated plate tectonics somewhere along the lines of Hapgood, but not to that extent and not that fast.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we should the questionnaire. Please go ahead.
Folks, thanks for taking the time to take a few questions. Thanks for the organisers, and it's lovely to meet everybody here as well. I'm obviously Irish, tell by the Irish accent, but a lot of the research I've done, there's an interesting connection in the Irish flood myths, the Irish migration myths, and I've done a bit of work into the likes of the genetic connection of the Irish to Egypt and the Irish to Iran. And there's further interesting stuff in regards to the sinking of Doggerland Bank and the connection to North America. Are you aware of any of these, the Irish flood myths, or any of the stories yourselves, or is anyone in the audience even?
Speaking for myself, I'm not as aware as I should be. I've tended to focus my research away from the old world, away from the European landmass. But I do know that there are intriguing memories preserved in Irish origins. How about you, Randall? Have you got any contact in this?
Same here, but it's something I'm extremely interested in. And I would say to you, what's your name?
My name's Kieran, or Ronnie, but I've a channel, I have a channel called Welcome to the Abyss, and I talk about all this stuff myself online. But so I just wanted to share to see if you agree with it.
All right.
Yeah, I'm interested in the Irish tradition, Kieran. If you could send me some links or something that I could begin to explore, I would love that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's brilliant. And my friend Linda wanted me to say, if I got the chance to talk to you, to say hello. And again, thanks very much. Thanks, folks. All the best.
Hi, Dan.
Gentlemen, my name is Jason Huffman. Thank you very much on behalf of myself and of humanity for the incredible role you have played in guiding me out of narrative blindness, and to inspiring independent researchers all over the world, but especially myself, to keep going. Thank you very much. Quick question I have for you. I was speaking with Nikki Anna Jones, and she's doing some work getting the hallmarks of this antediluvian civilization sort of documented and put together in a singular place. Now, a cultural hallmark, online, I'm Shaman 711. So I'm always looking for these shamanic sort of hallmarks. Now, Graham, you put a paper out about Gilgamesh, right? And we've got Gilgamesh constantly pictured holding his penis, right? So with Gilgamesh, we're looking back to the story of the antediluvian people. Now, today we heard Shiva also come up, as Shiva always being mentioned. And the Indus Valley, we have that pottery shard with the shaman cross-legged with the erect penis. Now, anyone who's engaged in psilocybin experience, going to other dimensions, as those things do, you realize that erect penis is not sexual at all, right? It is an expression of shamanic power. So when I see Gilgamesh holding that penis, I see Gilgamesh perhaps holding on to that power, and not as he was instructed, turning to.
I have no doubt Gilgamesh is a shamanic figure, and his concern with his afterlife destiny is an example of that. And the amount of information that Gilgamesh receives through dream is another indicator that we are dealing with a shamanic figure here, coupled with his mastery of animals. There's no doubt that the origins of the Gilgamesh tradition vastly precede its earliest written incarnations. It's a much older story than that, and it's a shamanic story. And in my case, when I speak of the possibility of a lost civilization, I'm speaking of a civilization that emerged out of darkness, and that the fundamental principles of that civilization were shamanistic, not materialistic like our culture today.
Correct. Yeah, thank you, gentlemen, very much. Yeah, that's it. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi guys, it's good to see you again. Randall, I have a question for you. So when we were in Cosmic Summit in June, you mentioned to me that you were very intrigued by Robert Schoch's theory of a solar outburst potentially being the source of melting for the ice caps. And I want to know if since then you've moved closer to that theory, or if you're still more on the side of it was an impact.
Well, for the Younger Dryas, lower Younger Dryas boundary, I'm more on the side that it was an impact. But I don't rule out the possibility of there being coronal mass ejections and solar storms. And I think we have to look at the whole system holistically, because what we now know from 20 years of solar observing satellites is that the sun is much more dynamic than we previously assumed. The solar constant was a myth. And it is also likely, and I might even be able to pull it up here if we have time, but there are now 2 instances of catching video footage of impacts into the sun immediately followed by mass coronal, immediately followed by large CMEs. And so where I'm at now is that we look at a mechanism for introducing essentially a comet storm to the inner solar system by something outside the comet sphere, which is the Oort cloud, which could be, like Graham was talking about earlier, perhaps a binary star system, perhaps some kind of galactic core event, perhaps nearby supernovas, some mechanism that can cause destabilization of these quasi-stable billions and billions of comets in the Oort cloud and Kuiper disk, send them sunward, and we may have, and I think the evidence is supporting, that bombardments typically come in clusters, and which would signify that the solar system, the inner solar system of the planetary realm, is probably overloaded with debris from some of these events. Now, the galactic core explosions the coronal mass ejections that we've seen associated with these 2 events of sun-grazing comets, they're called sun grazers, and the final destiny of virtually all comets that come into the solar system, if they haven't turned into dust, if they haven't been swept up by comets or satellites, they fall into the sun. And what we've seen now is that there's very strong possibility that there's an outsized response in the solar chromosphere to the influx of hypervelocity cometary masses.
In other words, it doesn't have to be one or the other.
It doesn't have to be one or the other.
It has to be the opposites. They can both be involved in this factor.
That's right.
And it makes sense that they are. I mean, looking at the evidence as it is, I would say the evidence is very strong that comet impacts, a comet storm, were what precipitated the Younger Dryas 12,860 years ago. But it very well could have been solar activity, perhaps agitated by that continuing comet storm that brought the Younger Dryas to an end 11,600 years ago.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. I think both Graham and I are kind of in that same idea now, that we have to look at the whole phenomena holistically, and it isn't a matter of either or. And while we're at it,
I just say it's very important to say this. I have huge respect for the work of Dr. Robert Schoch. And the fact that he and I have focused on different aspects of the Younger Dryas, that he's looking at the solar aspect and I've been looking at the comet aspect, doesn't mean that I disagree with him. I think he's done incredibly important work, and kudos to Robert Schoch for seeing it through all these years against all the opposition faced from quackademia. And his ideas on this are we're faced by an enormous mystery with Younger Dryas, and the more good minds that are at work, the better, and the more solutions that are proposed, the better as well. And I think we'll end up with something that's both, actually. The sun and the comets are both involved in this map.
Can I play a 10-second video clip? Okay, I'm going to share screen. If we can do this, I think this would be worth looking at.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Great question.
Thank you. I want him to see this. Okay, so what we've got here is a still image. The sun is behind this circle. We have to have something blocking the sun, or it would completely overwhelm the camera. Now, what you're going to watch here is you're going to see coming in from the lower right at about 4 o'clock. You're going to see a comet coming in, a small comet. You're going to see a small comet coming in. It's going to impact the sun, and then you're going to see the sun's response to that event. And this is why I'm now looking at a more holistic model of influx of cometary masses being swept up by the sun, and then the sun having a solar response. So watch down the lower right and watch this now. Okay, here we go. Okay, now watch. Here we go. Boom. Let's watch that one more time. Here comes the small comet, about the size of Halley.
Look at that.
Now that is pretty impressive. And this is why I'm of the mind now that we have to be looking at the big picture that includes all of these elements.
Yes. Randall, Graham, nice to see you guys again.
Hi.
Graham, I hope your book is going well. And Randall, I'm glad your trip went okay and you got back to the States okay. I just want to ask, I know I speak for myself and many people here in the audience, we'd love to get way more involved. Do you guys have any, I know you have a couple upcoming trips planned. Do you guys have any joint trips planned in the near future?
We don't, but we've talked about it, that we will do another trip together at some point. In my case, I would become free to do that after the end of October 2026, which is the delivery deadline for the book that I'm currently working on. After that, I'll come again, and I'd love to do another interview, Randall, and bring some fascinating folk along, and let's have a great journey.
Yeah, well, we certainly had, at least I had a lot of fun with you traveling across, even though we were cursed by the rain clouds exactly following us the entire way from Portland to Minneapolis, if you remember that.
Yes, I remember the rain god.
Yes, the rain god was, hey, I'm going to not make it easy on those guys.
So yeah, that's a good thought, and I think we should organize some later, Randall.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Okay, well.
Okay, thank you, Graham and Randall, so much. I really appreciate both of you, and thank you. I know you couldn't be here in person, but everyone's so elated just to have connection with you. So we're so happy for you to be here.
So glad to have been able to invite, and best wishes, all. Wishing all joy.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Graham and Randall.
Well, thank you, Robert, for putting this together again.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to say bye.
Okay, thanks, Graham.
Be well. Bye.
Okay, if anyone has any more questions for Randall, if there's any last minute questions, we were trying to save some questions for the live stream, but it seems like we don't have a connection there. So if anyone has any more questions for Randall, Randall's still here.
So I wanted to talk to you about being a recent resident of Arizona, in the high desert up north. My wife and I have found a lot of marine fossils on our property and stuff. And I stumbled across, studying it, the theory that there was an inland sea, you know, with the Rockies and everything, and that the Grand Canyon isn't millions of years old, as they say it is, that there was a rapid evacuation of water from the inland sea that may have caused it and all the formations, and that's why there's lots of marine life fossilization in the area. I don't know if you had any thoughts or ideas on that.
Well, I do, as a matter of fact. I think the inland sea you're referring to was prior to the uplift of the Colorado Plateau. That it goes back probably to Cretaceous times, if I recall. The uplift of the Colorado Plateau is probably no more than 10 to 12 million years old, right? Now, if you go right up like near the rim of Grand Canyon, there are limestones. That means that those limestones formed in a shallow marine environment. So, but of course, the Grand Canyon is only the lowest in the staircase, the Grand Staircase. There was another mile of rock. If you're standing on the north rim of Grand Canyon, which is about 7,000 feet above sea level, at one point, there was another mile of rock over your head that had to be removed before the canyon could even be downcut. Now, in my scenario that I'm looking at, you've got two extremes, and I don't think either one of them are realistic. One is the standard geological model that the modern Colorado River downcut the Grand Canyon slowly at the same rate that it's being eroded now. On the other side of the equation, you've got like a more biblical orientation that wants to attribute it to one great flood event that then is typically then associated with the Noachian flood of the Bible. Whereas what I've seen through my own studies of the Colorado Plateau is that it looks like there have been episodes of accelerated erosion juxtaposed upon the more normal rates of erosion such as we see today. If you look at Grand Canyon and you look at the topography of the Colorado Plateau, the entire drainage of the Colorado Plateau, which includes the watersheds of the San Juan River, the Green River, the Little Colorado, and ultimately the Colorado, all of the water draining off the Colorado Plateau is flowing towards this low point on the rim of the plateau, which is exactly where the Grand Canyon is located. There's evidence that transitions between glacial and interglacial ages, you have a very accelerated and compressed rate of erosional features and sedimentological, depositional and erosion. You have, whenever you have deposition of material, that means it was eroded from somewhere else. I think the model that fits is that the Colorado Plateau was uplifted, and it's called a plateau because most of the strata is relatively flat-lying, horizontal, like compared to the east and the northeast where you have the Rocky Mountains, where you have compressional uplift, right? So if you look at the strata in the Rocky Mountains, they're not level. It's tilted. Colorado Plateau is more or less level, but it's tilted. It's tilted. Think of a giant plate. I'll use this magnifying glass here. Imagine this is the plateau and it's tilted, right? Well, it's tilted this way. Let me set it this way. And here is the Grand Canyon right here, coming off of the southwestern corner of the plateau. All of this is a catchment basin. If you have a fluvial period where you have intensified rainfall, I mean, even modern examples, look at recently in Texas, look at last year in North Carolina, 3 days of rain, the kind of flooding catastrophes and diluvial catastrophes that can produce. Now imagine that you've got 3 to 4 or 5 weeks of intense rain, what would be called a fluvial period, drowning, submerging the entire Colorado Plateau. All of that water is feeding down towards the southwestern quadrant, and it's going to move into the Grand Canyon. And if you look at the topographic profile of the Grand Canyon, you'll see there's an inner canyon, the lowest canyon. It almost is a stepped profile. I would argue the possibility that there was a major fluvial period which has left its footprints all over the southwestern deserts, and it was caused accelerated erosion. So in other words, what I'm getting at is I would attribute the most of the downcutting of Grand Canyon to being a series of catastrophic floods discharging off the plateau, and that this has probably occurred over roughly the last 2.5 to 6 million years. Because the plateau uplifted roughly 10 to 12 million years ago. But then the shift from Pliocene to Pleistocene happened about 2.5 million years ago. So step number one, uplift to get the plateau at a higher level to where now it's going to be discharging any excess rainfall. Then you shift to 2.5 million years ago into the Pleistocene, where you now have the oscillating glacial interglacial cycles. There may have been 10 or 12 of those in the last 2.5 million years. Each of those appears that during those transition phases, weather goes crazy. We see this definitely during the Younger Dryas period. We see enormous episodes of intense rainfall. So what I'm trying to summarize here in a very short answer to your question is that I look at maybe 2.5 million years to cut Grand Canyon over a series of rapidly accelerated erosional events. Not a grain of sand, a drop of water at a time, like the uniformitarian models, not one big event, but multiple catastrophic events that have been playing out over the last roughly 2.5 million years. Does that is that the answer to your question? Or?
It's very, it was very clear and concise. Thank you. Much appreciated.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Randall. I have a
Hello.
question about your recent trip. You made a comment about the sand, the quality of the sand that was examined, and it was more reflective of being at a lower depth, closer to a coast. My question is, the way that the prevailing winds in that region come off of the Sahara, even if we're considering the Green Sahara theory, but how do you think that would impact the sands that would be seen at the ocean depth?
Oh, well, okay. So what you're going to have is the wind is going to be depositing a uniform layer of sand that's going to filter to the bottom of the ocean. Here in this case, you've actually got terraces, such as you would see at a typical profile of let's say a coastal region. And the sand is associated with that coastal region. And then the other point, maybe you didn't hear that, but in some of these cases in the sand, there are shallow marine fossils, such as you would find in a depth of only a couple of 100 feet, but now they're 1 mile to 2 miles below the surface of the ocean. So in other words, the wind is blowing, but the wind is going to be extremely variable. And so yes, you're going to have dust. It's primarily what it's doing is picking up dust. Now, off the west coast of Africa, yeah, you do find sand along the coastline, and you find sand going down actually into the abyssal plain. But they can very clearly define where that sand stops and regular marine accumulation begins. And that sand is typically, when you have terrigenous, meaning off the land surface, typical fossils in it, right? Now, then you'll have a big barren area where there's no sand, and then you've got sand associated with these step terrace profiles that have the morphology of a coastline. And in that sand, they're finding the remains of shallow water marine fossils. So I think that kind of would explain it. The wind is blowing off the Sahara. It's blowing sand out. That sand is deposited to the bottom of the sea off the west coast of Africa, and you find terrigenous fossils and remnants in there of land-based creatures, right, or flora or fauna. Then on the Madeira abyssal plain, as it's called, you've got this vast area where it's simply, you can see that the normal, the benthic, which are the bottom dwelling, and the planktonic denizens of the water column have died, and they have shifted down, and they've formed these limey marls, right? And so that separates the sand that has come off of the west coast of Africa and the sand that's found in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So I think that partially explains what your question would be.
It does, and thank you for clarifying. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hi, Randall.
Hi.
Giselle.
It's Giselle.
Oh,
Hi.
yes.
So-
Oh.
Hello. Ew. Okay, so before everyone laughs at this question, I think it has some validity, okay? So we'll run it by you, the expert. Grand Canyon. Okay, rapid events of erosion. More than one, right? Over the millennium. Okay, so if you look at an aerial of the Grand Canyon and you use certain eyes, it looks like a spine with a bunch of excavation coming off of it, right?
Uh-huh.
So could these rapid erosion events be some kind of mining operation millions of years old where people were extraterrestrial off-planet technology was mining the area? And then what we have left is the cavity and a mine site.
I have never thought of that idea before, Giselle.
See? And now you might think about it. Like it's plausible, is it not?
I don't know. I can't answer in the affirmative unless I think about it a little bit. I had no reason to doubt that the Grand Canyon was entirely a natural erosional event.
Well, when you say rapid, okay, look, next time you look at an,
Okay, I'm pulling up a map right now, and what am I?
yeah, let's look at it.
You want to look at it?
Yes.
Well, okay, we can do that.
Do y'all think I'm crazy? I'm getting some people, not everyone thinks I'm crazy, but I just saw it. It looks obvious to me.
Okay, I've got the map is in the all the way.
That's right. Open your mind.
Okay, Becca, I got the map up there. I'm in the waiting room with the map.
Yep.
And we'll make it quick. They want us to hurry.
You got 5 minutes to show this, Rand.
Do 1 minute. Okay, look.
Well, there we go. There's the map of the Grand Canyon. And if I back out here, Giselle, this right here, I'm circling it with my mouse. You can see it's almost circular. This is the Colorado Plateau. So if you think of it as a big plate, and you think of a lot of rain falling on that plate, and then it tilts towards this area right here. So here, everything is sloping towards the Grand Canyon. Up here by Durango, everything where the San Juan River comes out of the mountains is sloping towards the Colorado. Up here, the Green River comes, all of this, the entire catchment basin of the plateau drains to this point right here. This is how it gets off the plateau. So it just makes sense that you would have an extreme downcutting there. Now, you've got to come up, Giselle, and I'm going to hold you to this. You've got to come up with a well thought out scenario here. Who knows, you might convince me, but I don't know. So, but okay, if we zoom in, look at here. Okay, so you've got, look, this is drainage. This is erosion. You can see off the Vermilion Cliffs, rainfall falling over here has downcut this. See the cliff? It's downcut here, and then it's picked up speed, and it's downcut this, which is now Marble Canyon. Down here you've got the Little Colorado, which is catching all of the water that's flowing from this area down here, Second Mesa, loop. All of this down here is draining northwest, and then it gets right by Cameron, and then it starts cutting down as the gradient gets steeper, the water moves faster. And as it moves faster, it's more vigorous and energetic, so it can start down cutting much more effectively. And so that drains in here. And you'll see where the big part of it is, where the two watershed discharges meet right here. And that's where your major down cutting starts. But then look up here. You've also got discharge coming off of this area up here by Fredonia and Colorado City. All of this coming down. And then you've got this coming off here. So everything that's surface water caused by rainfall over the Colorado Plateau is all flowing towards this area right here. And I think
Point well taken.
taken to flow is perfectly sufficient at causing this erosion over 2.5 million years.
Thank you. And then the last seed I want to say is, has anyone done a study on how much gold, the density of gold in that canyon area that would have been there or was in the canyon? That's just the last thought. So seed planted. Thank you, Randall.
Well, I haven't thought of that, but if you find out of anything, yeah. I would like actually use a little more gold.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye. Love you. Great to see you again.
Hi, Randall.
Hey.
I really enjoyed the video you did on sacred geometry. I've watched it a couple of times, and I could talk to you all day about it. But related to that, do you have any thoughts on what a Roman dodecahedron could have been used for?
Ooh, a Roman dodecahedron. Well, if it was...
Are you familiar with what
I'm familiar with, of course, with the dodecahedron, not specifically a Roman dodecahedron. I'm familiar with dodecahedrons being modeled 4,000 years ago, megalithic, carved out of stone. Tell me more about the Roman dodecahedron.
They found, I think, over 200 examples of these in Roman era ruins, because ironically, they haven't found any on the Italian peninsula, but they have been found throughout Gaul and places where the Romans were, and they date to that time. And they're anywhere from softball down to golf ball size dodecahedrons, and each face has a different size hole in it. And on the corners, they have nipples. They were made of bronze, and they've been found in different rooms of wherever they were excavated from. So it wasn't always in a shop or near a forge or in a kitchen. So nobody's really sure. It's a fascinating topic. They're really interesting objects, and nobody knows what they were used for.
Now that you mention it, I remember I have seen pictures of what you're describing. And it's been quite a long time, so I'd kind of drawn a blank there when you first said Roman, because I didn't remember specifically that they were Roman. Yeah, those were interesting. And I wish I could say, yeah, well, here's the explanation for exactly what they were used for, but I'm sorry. I'm profoundly sorry and apologetic that I don't have the answer to that question. But if you do research and you find out, let me know. But you know what? I probably will actually look into this again and see what I come up with.
Yeah, you can order them. They're made on a 3D printer now, and so I got one of them. And just to hold one in your hands and play, and how the amazing amount of craftsmanship it would have taken to make one of those days where they didn't have things like. I think they probably had solder, but I don't think they could weld back then. So it's fascinating, but I won't take up anybody else's time. So thank you.
All right. Well, I appreciate you bringing that to
One last quick question here, Randall.
Okay.
Mr. Carlson, Jason Huffman back from the Shaman and the Philosopher podcast. Your work, sir, all the way from your thesis on Halloween, the Holy Grail videos you have online. You have seen me through dark days for a long time. So thank you very much for not only all that you do for humanity, but for us out here that just latch on to your work. Now, to your geologic work, I have a question. So I'm from Alabama. I live in Alabama. I know you're in the Southeast. So your work I've seen about what happened in the Northeast, and I'm thinking specifically of the immediate aftermath, the effects of this younger drought. What would I have seen or experienced, let's say from Texas to Alabama or Georgia? What would have been the effects happening in the Southeast United States?
That's an interesting question. I think one of the things you would have experienced would have been a period of prolonged rainfall. Certainly, we can see in any of the higher elevations in the Southeast, we can see the evidence, unambiguous evidence of extreme flows throughout the hollows and creeks and rivers of the Southeast. What happens, though, is that, again, the steeper the gradient, the faster a water flow. If you've got a deluge, which is a function of intense prolonged rainfall, and that is coming off of uplands, like, say, the mountainous areas of North Carolina, it's moving fast. So the faster it moves, the more powerful it's going to be and capable of eroding. Now, as you get down to lower gradients, the water's moving slow. Typically, you have to think in terms of a twofold process: erosion, deposition. Fast water, steep gradient, erosion.
Right.
Slow water, shallow gradient, deposition. So most likely what you would have experienced now you go over North Alabama near Huntsville, where you're still got the upland, you can go in those creek hollows and you're going to see the evidence of catastrophic water flows. As you move south onto the Gulf Plain, you're getting more level. So in the aftermath of the events, if somehow you had survived, most likely what you would see is vast areas of simply mud.
Yeah.
Just vast fields of mud.
Yeah.
And which is called, the geological term is alluvium. So you would have seen vast areas just submerged under alluvium. And that will quickly regenerate from, into forests and so on. The foliage.
Worms, alluvium. Alluvium.
Alluvium is
Okay.
Alluvium. Alluvium.
Right. I thought I heard a prefix. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Oh, well, you would have seen vast areas of alluvium.
Right.
And that's going to quickly regenerate. Within a few centuries, it's going to have, foliage is going to have reclaimed that area. And so you're not going to see a lot 1,000 or 10,000 years later, but if you dig down, you're going to see alluvium. Like there's places up in North Georgia where I go sometimes and I look at where streams have cut through. What's interesting in some of these cases is you'll see maybe a foot of topsoil. And at the rate that in the Southeast, topsoil forms at about 1 inch per millennium. So if you've got a foot of topsoil, you're looking at 10 or 12,000 years. Then on top of that, you might have a layer of alluvium, which is water deposited. And then under that, you may have gravel, cobbles, boulders. Sometimes if the water is moving fast enough, it strips away everything that's there down to bedrock.
Yeah.
If it's a swiftly moving, like here you have to move a little bit into the more of the uplands. We could probably do a trip up into the uplands of up there near Huntsville and the northern area.
Indeed. Yeah. Mentone. That's where I explore. Yeah. Lookout Mountain.
Yeah. You would probably find this very similar thing. Like up in northern Georgia, I can go to creeks where you've got bedrock outcrops, and then that would have been covered in sediment prior to these floods, But the floods come in, flush everything out. Now you got bare bedrock. Then as the floods subside, they're vigorous. So they're carrying gravel, cobbles, rocks. That gets laid down right on top of the bedrock. Now, if the water is slowing down, the finer stuff deposits later. Obviously, the bigger the material, it's going to be the first stuff that gets deposited. So you can see this gradate. You can see bedrock, rocks, gravel, cobbles. Then you're going to see finer grained alluvium, and then you're going to see 10,000 years of topsoil on top of that.
Got it.
That's a pretty unambiguous sea.
And that water exited into the Gulf of Mexico, am I right? Then the flow
yeah.
here.
And in fact, one of the major discharge points was right at the bay there. The whole
Mobile Bay?
Which one?
Mobile Bay?
Mobile, yes.
Yeah. That would have been a drainage point. Oh, perfect. Excellent.
That's right.
You've explained much, sir. Thank you so much for your time. Godspeed in your recovery. Be well, okay? Thank you.
Good question. Maybe we'll join you out in the field one of these days.
Would love that. Thank you, sir.
One more question, Randall. Sam Sampson is here. Remember Sam?
I remember, well, we'll see.
Hey, Randall.
Oh, there. Yep.
Question.
Sam. Okay.
So this is the Chartres Cathedral in France.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, why does it seem like modern Christians have kind of forgotten the astrological connection with religion? So like the four zodiac signs are in there, the four fixed signs, and it's like the man, the lion, the bull, and the eagle, and that's connected to the four gospels of like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? But when I talk to Christians, they seem to say no, astrology is bad and there's no connection, but it seems like there's an obvious connection.
Well, there is an obvious connection, and what's happened is dogmas have replaced the ancient wisdom tradition that out of which Christianity was born, in my opinion. Like you just showed, those are four signs of the zodiac. Those are the four fixed signs of the zodiac, right? Taurus, Leo, Aquarius, and Scorpio. And interestingly, if you connect those in the sky, in space, they form a giant cross, don't they? And that cross is rotating through the ages. And I think that was an intrinsic part of original Christianity that was either forgotten, lost, or deliberately suppressed. And then during the Middle Ages, there was a revival of some of the earlier first and second Gnostic traditions of Christianity. And then for a variety of reasons, it went underground again, probably when the world shifted between around 1300 and the bubonic plague came into the world, and there was like a superstitious reaction that we were being punished for something. And what we interestingly see is that when these climatic catastrophes occur, which are often followed by, because you have the onset of the Little Ice Age was somewhat catastrophic. This was the early 1300s. The cathedrals were being built during this 250 to 300 year warm period called the medieval warm period, which was warmer than now. It had a longer growing season. There was plenty of food, and you had an increase in European population that allowed for the resources to undertake this incredible enterprise of building these Gothic cathedrals. And at that time, a lot of the symbolism was encoded into those cathedrals. Like Victor Hugo says, I think they're literally textbooks in stone of the ancient Hermetic wisdom. Well, then, with the climate catastrophes that occurred in the early 1300s, you had a whole series of agricultural collapses and famines that spread over Europe. Those famines led to people being, their immune systems becoming compromised, and that created the potential for opportunistic plagues and diseases. So after 30 years of declining climate, you had the bubonic plague that swept over Europe, wiped out in some places a third or more of the population. And at that point, you see this rapid decline in the cathedral building era, a rapid decline in prosperity, huge mortality, And you also see the rise of a superstitious, we're being punished. We're being punished by God for something. And interestingly, between there and up to the late 1600s, every time there's a climate catastrophe, where there's a several, let's say, years in a row of cold weather and agricultural collapses, famine and disease, there is an oppressive response. So, for example, virtually all of the pogroms against witches all followed in the wake of climate catastrophes. Bad weather, 2 or 3 years in a row of of agricultural failure, people going hungry, people dying. Now, scapegoats. They're looking for scapegoats, and it kind of follows from that. So I think what we saw happen was that a rise of superstition between the 1300s and the 1700s, say, and it was oppressing a lot of the ancient traditions, and new devils had to be erected to explain, and tens of thousands of women were burned at the stake, were hung, were killed, and the loss of knowledge about medicinal plants and things is just tremendous. It was a horrible tragedy, and it fueled the rise of superstition. And a lot of the modern dogmas have come right out, have their roots in those superstitious areas. Whereas, and that's to where I would attribute it. The rise of fundamentalism came from a literal belief that the devil was controlling the witches, and the witches had to be destroyed. And along with that was the knowledge and the intellectual period that sort of disappeared, went underground between 1300 and late 1600s until we had the Renaissance. And it goes much deeper than that, but I think that's part of it. And so we're still seeing now, there was this conflict between science and religion. Late 16 throughout the 1700s. With the 1800s, we had the supremacy of the scientific approach. But in the ancient times, there was not really this dichotomy. It wasn't science here, religion here. It was about one unified, holistic knowledge of the world, of how things work, of nature. So that's kind of what I would attribute to. But the symbolism is still there. It can't be denied. Ask a true believer in the fundamentalist version of Christianity, well, what do these mean? You say that astrology had no part. Well, I think part of the ancient knowledge was the recognition that, no matter how we slice it, the cosmos affects us here below. And I think we can now begin to scientifically demonstrate the multiple ways. Just some of the things we were looking at here and talking about with Graham. That yes, things that happen out there in the sky and in the stars and amongst the planets definitely have consequences for what's here below on the planet. So, I just think that, again, it's basically superstition. And I don't think it has much to do with original Christianity. It was part of a wisdom tradition.
Awesome. Thank you, man. Okay.
All right.
Yeah. Hi there, Randall.
Hi there, Robert.
Thank you so much, Randall, for joining us. That was really cool. Everyone's really elated here. Let's give Randall a hand. We appreciate you so much. It was really great having you on. Super cool. And we look forward to seeing you in person in May.
Okay. Love it, man.